Just as your eyelids feel impossibly heavy and your thoughts begin to blur, your whole body snaps. A quick, violent jerk that makes you gasp and grab the sheets like you've just stepped off a cliff. Sound familiar? That sudden lurch is called a hypnic jerk, and almost everyone has experienced it at least once. Here's what's happening under the hood. As your brain shifts out of wakefulness and into sleep, the systems that normally keep your muscles lightly engaged start to dial back. Most of the time this is smooth and silent, but sometimes the nervous system misfires. One last electric pulse shoots through your muscles, and your limbs respond with a reflexive twitch. It's abrupt, it's startling, but crucially, it's harmless. There's nothing physically wrong, it's just your body's confused exit from consciousness. The sensation often comes with a brief, vivid mental image. You'll briefly see yourself tripping, dropping something, or falling off an edge. That flash isn't random. Scientists think the brain can misinterpret the relaxation signals as freefall, so it fires a reflex to right the body. Evolutionary thinkers even speculate that for our tree-dwelling ancestors, that jolt would have been useful, a last-second wake-up to keep you from tumbling out of a branch. Today, there aren't many of us dozing off in trees, but the reflex lingers, an archaic safety net that doesn't always know when it's no longer necessary. There are a few common triggers you've probably noticed. Stressed nights, heavy caffeine late in the day, or irregular sleep schedules all seem to make hypnic jerks more frequent. Ever had one after a late coffee or a day when your mind wouldn't stop running? Yeah, that's not a coincidence. The more wound up your nervous system, the more likely it is to misfire during that fragile transition into sleep. If you want to stop waking up with that frightened gasp, small changes can help. Try cutting back on caffeine in the afternoon and evening, build a calming bedtime routine, and aim for consistent sleep times. Simple stress reduction techniques like breathing exercises or a short mindfulness practice before bed can lower the nervous system's reactivity and make that transition smoother. So next time your body gives you that little shake, remember, it's not a sign that something is wrong. It's the body's confused goodbye to consciousness, the last shudder before surrendering to dreams. You might not love the surprise, but it's just your ancient wiring doing its job, out of tune with modern life. Sleep paralysis. One of the most unsettling sleep experiences people describe is sleep paralysis. That moment when your brain wakes up a little too early, but your body is still following REM's rules. Imagine this. You open your eyes, the room is dim, you can hear distant traffic or the hum of a fan, and you know you're awake. But your limbs won't move. Your breathing feels shallow, like you're tiptoeing along the edge of air. You try to call out and nothing comes. It's as if someone hit the pause button on your body while your mind kept playing. I remember the first time it happened to me. I blinked, aware of my bedroom, and then a pressure built on my chest. Not physical, more like the feeling of a heavy blanket someone had laid across me. At the same time, something in the corner of the room felt present. I couldn't turn my head. My heart was racing, but I couldn't scream. For a few terrible seconds it felt supernatural, as if the house had an extra occupant. What it actually was, neurologically, is less mystical and more interesting. A temporary overlap of REM paralysis and waking consciousness. During REM sleep, our brains send signals that effectively switch off major muscle groups. This is a protective mechanism, the body's way of stopping us from acting out dreams and injuring ourselves. Sleep paralysis happens when that mechanism doesn't switch off quickly enough as your mind is booting back up. The dreaming, hallucinatory part of REM can linger and fold into your waking awareness. That's why people report seeing figures, feeling a presence, or sensing pressure on the chest. Those are dream elements invading the waking scene while the body remains locked in REM's safety protocol. It helps to know the common triggers because they're often things we can change. Stress, long stretches without sleep, and irregular sleep schedules make sleep paralysis more likely. Pulling an all-nighter, jetting across time zones, or sleeping in short, fragmented bursts increases the chance that your sleep architecture will become disorganized and REM will spill over into wakefulness. Even strong emotions, anxiety, shame, grief, can raise the odds, probably because they fragment sleep and intensify dreaming. Neurologically, sleep paralysis is a striking reminder that consciousness isn't a simple on-off switch. There's a narrow, eerie passage where you can be half inside a dream and half aware of the room around you. That liminal space is what makes the experience so terrifying. You're cognitively aware enough to understand what's happening, but physically helpless until your REM circuitry completes the transition. The crucial point is this: it feels dangerous, but it's not. The body's immobilized reflex is still intact. You can't act out or injure yourself during those moments. It's unpleasant and frightening, but fundamentally safe. If you've had it, you're not alone, and you're not broken. The hallucinations and sensations are real in the sense your brain is producing them, but they're a temporary mismatch in timing rather than evidence of something supernatural. Later in this video, we'll explore practical ways to reduce how often it happens, simple sleep habits and stress tools that lower the chance of REM and wakefulness colliding. For now, hold on to the fact that the paralysis is short-lived, and understanding what's happening is the first step toward feeling less helpless when it returns. Fragmented sleep. It happens when your night doesn't flow. It splinters into tiny pieces. You might not wake with a dramatic alarm. Instead, your sleep gets punctured by brief awakenings or micro-arousals, so short you don't even remember them. But each one is enough to reset your brain's rhythm, so even a long span in bed can leave you robbed of the deep, restorative cycles that actually do the work. Think about it like this. Imagine trying to read a novel where someone flips the lights off every few minutes. You might finish the pages, but you won't absorb the plot, the emotions, the meaning. That's what fragmented sleep does to your nights. The slow-wave sleep that repairs your muscles and immune system gets chopped up. REM sleep, the stage that helps you process emotions and file memories, gets interrupted. You don't get the continuous stretches your brain needs to complete those jobs. Causes are familiar and often sneaky. Stress and anxiety push you into shallow sleep and make you wake repeatedly. Chronic pain or an overactive bladder can drag you out of deeper stages. Aging naturally shortens uninterrupted sleep for many people. And then there's hidden sleep apnea. Sometimes the stops are so brief and internal you don't recall gasping, but the repeated oxygen dips fragment your sleep over and over. Even a partner's snoring, restless legs, or late-night phone checks add up. The real sting here is that the damage can be invisible. You might clock 8 hours and tell yourself, "I slept fine," yet feel exhausted, foggy, irritable the next day. That's because it's not just the total hours that matter. It's the architecture. Deep sleep and REM are like different departments in a factory. Deep sleep is maintenance and repair. REM is quality control and software update. Fragmentation interrupts both, so repair is incomplete and organization never finishes. Day-to-day that looks like mood swings that come out of nowhere, trouble concentrating during meetings or while driving, cravings for sugar or quick energy because your metabolic signals are confused, and slower recovery after workouts. Over months and years, the cumulative effect can nudge your risk for depression, weight gain, and even chronic illnesses. If any of this rings true, you sleep enough but wake like you were hit by a truck, or your partner complains about choking noises in the night, it's worth noticing. Start by tracking. A sleep diary or a simple tracker can show patterns you don't remember. Address obvious disruptors first: stress management, pain control, limiting late-night screens. And if there are signs of sleep apnea, loud snoring, gasping, daytime sleepiness, bring it up with your doctor. Fragmented sleep is fixable, but only if you recognize that the problem isn't how many hours you spend in bed, it's how those hours are actually structured. Exploding head syndrome. Sometimes, right as you're drifting off, that half-awake, floaty place where dreams start to pull you under, something rips through the quiet. A gunshot, an explosion, an electric pop. It's so loud in your head it can make you bolt upright, heart pounding. You look around the room. No one else is awake. No one else heard it. That jolt has a name: exploding head syndrome. If you've ever had it, you know how theatrical it feels. I remember the first time it happened to me, lying there in the dark, convinced a car had slammed into the house, and then realizing everything was fine except my own racing brain. That's the key. The noise is entirely internal. It isn't pain. It isn't a real external event. It's an auditory hallucination that happens because part of the brain fires off a burst of activity as consciousness is powering down. Scientists think the culprit is a sudden burst in the brainstem, a miscommunication between sensory and motor networks as the brain switches gears into sleep. Some people hear a bang. Others report a pop, a buzz, or even a ringing. And for a portion of folks, the experience is visual. A flash of light instead of a sound. It's worth repeating. Dramatic name, harmless reality. Exploding head syndrome leaves no physical trace, no injury. Mostly what's left is that startled, confused feeling, maybe a little anxiety about going back to sleep. The phenomenon is more common than you might think, especially when you're run down. Fatigue, stress, inconsistent sleep schedules, and sleep deprivation all lower the threshold for these episodes. Imagine your brain as an old radio. Most of the time it tunes out smoothly, but when the dials slip, you get a burst of static. So what do you do when it happens? First, breathe. Remind yourself that it's not dangerous. If it only occurs occasionally, improving basic sleep hygiene often helps. Regular bedtimes, cutting late caffeine or heavy screens, and managing stress. Short naps and catching up on sleep can also reduce the chance of another surprise. If episodes become very frequent, disturb your daytime functioning, or are accompanied by other symptoms like severe headaches or weakness, it's worth talking to a doctor or a sleep specialist just to rule out other conditions. At the end of the day, exploding head syndrome is one last tiny spark as the lights go out. A weird bit of neural static that startles you into wakefulness and then vanishes without a trace. It's unsettling, yes, but almost never dangerous. Knowing what it is turns a midnight scare into something you can name and manage, and that can make it a lot less scary the next time it happens. Hypersomnia. Hypersomnia feels like living in a house with the lights on, but the dimmer never quite reaches full brightness. You can sleep 10 hours, 12, sometimes more. Yet when you open your eyes, you're greeted not by clarity, but by a slow, soggy fog. The body has done its job, rested muscles, steady breathing, maybe even long stretches of REM. But the brain, it hasn't received the full wake-up call. You move through your morning routine, pour coffee, answer messages, and still something essential is hanging back, half asleep. This isn't the same as being tired after a late night or dragging through a long week. Hypersomnia is a disorder of regulation. It's not laziness or bad habits. For many people, it's linked to chemical imbalances. Dopamine plays a leading role. Or to conditions like narcolepsy that affect the brain's switch between sleep and wake. When researchers scan these brains, the arousal centers show reduced activity, as if the command to fully wake never reaches the rest of the system. The result blurs the boundary between night and day. The world is technically awake, but you're moving through it in a dream's shadow. Think about the small humiliations this causes. You miss a meeting because you slept through an alarm, but not because you needed sleep, because what you got wasn't restorative. You stare at a breakfast plate and can't taste it properly. You drive an extra mile because the route looks unfamiliar. You try to engage with friends, but your responses are delayed. You feel like you're talking from underwater. And the most frustrating part is knowing that more sleep doesn't help. If anything, it can make the fog feel thicker. Too much sleep, but not the right kind that refreshes. It also warps how you experience time. Nights and mornings fold into each other. Naps aren't restorative, and daytime sleep resembles a low-grade dream state more than wakefulness. There's an emotional cost too: guilt, confusion, and sometimes shame when loved ones or co-workers mistake the condition for indifference. That misreading only makes people retreat, hide symptoms, or push themselves into overcompensation, which can worsen mood and cognition. Because hypersomnia is a disorder of the brain's regulation systems, treatments focus on resetting those circuits. Medication that targets dopamine pathways, lifestyle changes to stabilize sleep schedules, and in some cases, addressing an underlying issue like narcolepsy. But the first step is recognition. If mornings feel like a permanent haze no matter how long you sleep, it's not something to shrug off. Talk to a sleep specialist. Keep a sleep diary to show patterns. Share how it affects your day-to-day, not just how many hours you're in bed, but how you feel after them. You're not broken, and this isn't about willpower. Hypersomnia is an honest signal from your nervous system that the mechanisms that should let you rise and be alert are out of sync. With the right diagnosis and support, many people reclaim clearer mornings and days that feel, finally, like waking up. Sleep onset. Insomnia. You close your eyes and everything should fold inward. Limbs slacken, breath deepens, the world fades. But the switch won't flip. Your body does what it's supposed to do. It slows down, your heart eases, melatonin begins to rise. Your brain, though, keeps talking. It's like someone left the radio on in your head. Instead of the sweet blur of sleep, there's a loop of plans, petty regrets, grocery lists, and that one thing you forgot to say in a meeting. That's sleep onset insomnia, the failure to move from thinking to resting. It's not just being unable to fall asleep. It's a mismatch between two systems. Stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, can stay elevated even as melatonin knocks politely on the door. So the body drifts towards sleep, while the alertness machinery stubbornly stays on. EEG scans show this clearly. People stuck in this space hover in alpha waves. You're not fully awake, but you're not asleep either. You're in a fuzzy middle ground where the mind keeps clinging to wakefulness, while the body yawns and waits. Think about the nights you've lain in bed replaying conversations, rewriting tomorrow's to-do list, or scrolling your phone until the blue light feels like electricity in your skull. Light exposure, especially screens late at night, amplifies the problem. Anxiety makes the loop louder. Irregular schedules confuse your internal clock so your body and brain aren't even trying to agree on when the shift should happen. All of these pull that shimmering threshold out of reach. It feels personal because it is. I've been there, eyes shut, heart like it's in a running scene, mind filing mental paperclips. You tell yourself to relax and, paradoxically, that instruction becomes another thing to think about. The silence you expect doesn't arrive. You can hear the friction of your own thoughts. That's what makes sleep onset insomnia so cruel. It takes something private and necessary, the descent into unconsciousness, and turns it into performance anxiety. The image I keep returning to is not a door, but a threshold, like a lake at dusk. The surface looks placid, but it's a boundary you can't step through until the water calms. Crossing it usually requires conditions: dim light, a predictable routine, low cortisol, and a mind quiet enough to notice the drift. Without those, the threshold shivers and refuses to be crossed. If you recognize this, there are small, practical moves that nudge the system. Dim screens an hour before bed. Practice a short, timed breathing exercise to lower sympathetic arousal. Inhale 4 counts, exhale 6, repeat 5 minutes. Keep a notepad by the bed. If your brain starts that loop, write the thought down once, then close the book. Try to keep consistent sleep and wake times so your internal clock learns when to hand over control. The point isn't blaming yourself for a noisy brain, it's seeing the glitch for what it is: a fragile crossing that needs gentle conditions to work. Once you stop fighting the noise and give your nervous system the cues it recognizes, that shimmering threshold can be coaxed into calm. And one night at a time, the switch will begin to flip. Nocturnal leg cramps. Then there's the sudden, searing shock. Your calf knots up like a fist and you bolt upright, breath shallow, heart racing. That's a nocturnal leg cramp, an involuntary muscle contraction that won't let go. You know the feeling. The muscle twists, every fiber clenches, and for a few long seconds, or painfully longer, it feels like something has you by the calf and isn't releasing. People blame all sorts of things, and often they're right. Dehydration, an imbalance of minerals like potassium, magnesium, or calcium, or simple nerve irritation can trigger these episodes. But sometimes there's no obvious cause at all. You could go to bed fine and wake up being assaulted by a lightning bolt of pain. That randomness is part of what makes cramps so unnerving. Here's the science in plain terms. When we sleep, the brain relaxes its control over voluntary muscles. The circuits that keep our limbs steady loosen their grip to let us rest. If a motor nerve fires at the wrong time, a little electrical misfire, the signal to release the muscle takes longer to arrive. Meanwhile, the muscle is locked. So while it feels mysterious or even sinister, it's really your body's own electricity sparking at the wrong moment. Historically, people described that sudden grip as a demonic attack, a supernatural force seizing the limb. The language comes from the same raw feeling, an invisible, unreasoning force taking over. Once you know it's a biological hiccup, the terror eases a little, but the pain does not. What helps in the moment? There are a few reliable tricks. Straighten your leg and flex your foot upward toward your knee. That lengthens the calf and often helps the muscle relax. Stand up and gently walk it off if you can. Walking engages the muscle differently and can break the spasm. Massage the area, apply heat to soothe the muscle, or try a cold pack if there's residual ache. Sip water and breathe slowly so the rest of you can calm down too. For prevention, think about hydration and electrolytes. Drink enough water, and if you sweat a lot or exercise heavily, consider replenishing sodium, potassium, and magnesium through diet or supplements after checking with your doctor. Gentle calf stretches before bed, avoiding late heavy exercise that leaves your muscles fatigued, and moderating alcohol and diuretics that can dehydrate you all help. If cramps are frequent, severe, or accompanied by swelling, numbness, or weakness, see a doctor. Sometimes they point to circulatory or neurological conditions that need attention. The next time a cramp jolts you awake, remember what it is: an overexcited muscle, not a curse. That small shift in thinking can make the pain feel a bit less isolating, and the simple fixes often make it stop. Sleepwalking. Think about waking up in the kitchen with a jar in your hand and no memory of getting there. That surreal moment is sleepwalking. The body moving with purpose, while the conscious narrator, the part of you that says, "Hey, what are you doing?" is completely offline. At its core, sleepwalking happens because the brain's motor circuits wake up before awareness does. During deep, non-REM sleep, large parts of the brain are submerged in slow waves, but the systems that control movement, especially the motor cortex, can flicker into a wake-like state. The result? Coordinated, sometimes complex actions driven by procedural memory. The autopilot of the mind that knows how to walk, swallow, or even operate a familiar set of motions without thinking. It's the brain running a well-rehearsed script while the director's chair is empty. That mismatch is why a sleepwalker can get out of bed, walk to the fridge, dress, or, in rare and dangerous cases, drive. All with their eyes open, but no real awareness. To someone watching, it's eerie. Glassy eyes, purposeful movements, an absence of response to normal conversation. To the sleeper, there's nothing. No dream replay, no recollection, just a gap in experience that can feel like waking up an hour later with the oddity of a misplaced mug. Brain imaging gives this a creepy kind of clarity. Scans of sleepwalkers show most of the brain bathed in slow-wave sleep activity, the same pattern we see in deep sleep, except for islands of wake-like activation around the motor cortex. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for planning, judgment, and self-awareness, remains quiet. That's a scientific way of saying the body's taking orders from the autopilot while the pilot is asleep. It helps to put it in everyday terms. Imagine you've practiced a piano piece so much you could play it with your eyes closed. Procedural memory stores those practiced routines. Now imagine doing that while you're half asleep. Your fingers remember the movements even though you're not paying attention. Sleepwalking is the same principle on a larger scale. Muscles and learned actions carrying on without conscious guidance. Triggers are often familiar too. Stress, sleep deprivation, certain medications, and genetics. If a parent sleepwalked, you're more likely to see it in the family. Busy minds and busy days can prime the brain to mismanage the boundaries between sleep stages, making those motor circuits more likely to wake early. That's why episodes sometimes cluster during high-pressure periods or after a poor night's sleep. For anyone who's ever found themselves sitting on the stairs in the morning with no idea how they got there, that gap can be unnerving. For partners or parents who watch a loved one move around while unresponsive, it can feel almost supernatural. But knowing the brain's role, the strange duality where parts of us sleep and parts move, turns mystery into a source of empathy and caution. The body keeps going, the script keeps running, and the narrator is simply missing. That's sleepwalking. A disquieting, organized confusion. Human behavior on autopilot, shaped by the deep machinery of the sleeping brain. Bruxism. That restless beat the brain keeps during sleep often shows up in a surprisingly physical way. Bruxism, the grinding or clenching of teeth. It's not a dramatic, conscious choice. It's an unconscious reflex tied to tiny micro-arousals in the night. Picture the brain flicking on for a second, enough to trigger a burst of activity that jerks the jaw muscles into action for a few seconds. That snap of muscle firing can repeat many times through the night. For a lot of people, stress is the obvious culprit. You know the feeling. Deadlines, tension, things left unresolved when you finally lie down. But there's also a biochemical angle. Imbalances in dopamine regulation can make those micro-arousals more likely, turning what might be an occasional clench into a nightly habit. Either way, the force involved isn't trivial. When your teeth meet under that reflex, the pressure can reach hundreds of pounds per square inch. Over months and years, that's how enamel erodes, dental work fails, and the jaw and neck tighten into a constant, low-grade pain. Most people don't notice it while it's happening. EEG studies show bruxism coincides with brief awakenings on the brain's recordings, tiny blips that the sleeper usually doesn't remember. Your partner might report the nighttime noises, or you might wake with a sore jaw or a headache and assume it was something you did during the day. By the time the dentist points out flattened or chipped teeth, or you start getting morning stiffness in your neck, the damage is already underway. There are two ways researchers interpret what the brain is up to. One view sees bruxism as an involuntary release of built-up tension, a kind of nocturnal let-off valve. The other suggests it's compensatory. The jaw activity helps keep the airway open for a split second during sleep transitions. Either way, it's a reminder. Even deep sleep isn't a completely quiet state. The nervous system stays engaged, scanning and reacting in micro moments. If this sounds familiar, waking with jaw pain, noticing worn enamel, or having someone tell you grind your teeth, treat it like a clue, not a mystery. It tells you something about your stress load, your sleep stability, and even your brain chemistry. Small changes or professional input can catch the problem earlier than an aching jaw or costly dental repair. Bruxism may be a hidden, nocturnal behavior, but it leaves very real marks. And listening to those marks is how you start to fix the rhythm. Cataphrenia. Speaking of unusual sleep sounds, cataphrenia, often called nocturnal groaning, is one of those things that can make a quiet bedroom feel like a mystery. Imagine this. At 3 a.m., your partner lets out a long, low moan that sounds dramatic enough to wake you. But when you nudge them, they don't stir. It can be unnerving, embarrassing if it's your own sound, and funny when you hear it on a phone recording. The good news, it's usually harmless. Here's what's actually happening. During exhalation, the sleeper releases a sustained, low-frequency moan. It isn't snoring, which happens during inhalation and often involves airway obstruction, and it isn't a sign of distress like in some breathing disorders. Instead, it's a timing glitch. The brainstem, which coordinates the rhythm of breathing and the muscles involved, is slightly out of sync. That mismatch means the vocal cords partially close as air leaves the lungs, so the escaping air vibrates slowly and produces that groaning sound. Most episodes crop up during REM sleep, when the body's muscle tone shifts dramatically. REM turns down the usual muscle stiffness that keeps everything in place, so the delicate timing between respiratory muscles and vocal folds is more likely to wobble. Sleep studies, polysomnography, that record brain waves, breathing, oxygen levels, and heart rate usually show normal oxygen saturation and a steady heart rate. In other words, there's no physiological danger, only a surprisingly theatrical noise. If you're the one groaning, it can feel awkward to learn about it from a partner's phone video. If you're the one hearing it night after night, you might worry it's something serious. Most clinicians will reassure you that cataphrenia is benign. It doesn't damage the lungs, it doesn't deprive the sleeper of oxygen, and it's not a sign of cardiac trouble. That said, if the sound comes with gasping, pauses in breathing, daytime sleepiness, or other worrying signs, that's a reason to get evaluated. There are practical things people do, making a recording to show a sleep specialist, noting when it happens, is it only in REM, only on certain nights, and discussing it openly with a partner so blame or embarrassment doesn't build up. Treatments aren't always necessary for health reasons. Sometimes behavioral techniques, positional changes, or in rare cases, CPAP have been tried to reduce the noise. Cataphrenia is a neat reminder of how finely tuned quiet breathing really is. Even while unconscious, the brain is conducting an orchestra of muscles, and occasionally one instrument drifts off key, producing a groan that's loud in the room but harmless to the body. Sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is one of the most measurable sleep glitches, and one of the most dangerous when left alone. Unlike the occasional bad night, apnea is a repeated pattern. The airway or the brain repeatedly interrupts breathing, dozens or even hundreds of times a night. Each pause only lasts a few seconds, but those seconds add up into a night full of micro-awakenings your mind doesn't remember and your body never forgets. There are two main flavors. Obstructive sleep apnea happens when the soft tissues in the throat relax and collapse, literally blocking airflow even though your body is trying to breathe. Central sleep apnea is different and a little stranger. The brain briefly fails to send the signal to breathe. Either way, the result is the same: a pause, a drop in oxygen, and an abrupt jolt back toward wakefulness. That jolt might be so slight you only notice a gasp, a choking sound, or a shift in position. Most people don't recall these moments in the morning. They wake up piecing together clues, a dry mouth, morning headaches, or the vague sense that they never slept well. If you've ever been told you snore loudly, or your partner has woken you up gasping, that's not just annoying. It can be a red flag. Snoring can be harmless, but when it's punctuated by silence and then a sudden snort or gasp, that's often apnea in action. Imagine the body repeatedly moving from the stillness of sleep into a brief alert state. Heart rate spikes, stress hormones surge, and oxygen levels dip. Your nervous system responds as if you've been through mini suffocations all night. Over time, this isn't just tiring, it taxes the heart and blood vessels, raises blood pressure, and raises your risk for cardiovascular problems. On a personal level, apnea changes the day-to-day in ways that sneak up on you. You might find yourself nodding off on the couch, needing caffeine earlier and earlier, or struggling with memory and mood. You might chalk it up to a busy life or not getting enough hours, but deep restorative sleep, the slow wave and REM cycles that rebuild your body and consolidate memory, is getting disrupted every hour. That chronic fragmentation explains the constant fatigue no alarm clock seems to fix. The good news is, apnea is diagnosable and treatable. Sleep clinics measure it objectively with a sleep study, either a comprehensive overnight test in a lab or a validated home test that counts how many times breathing stops or is reduced per hour. Treatment depends on the cause. For obstructive apnea, the gold standard is CPAP, continuous positive airway pressure, which keeps the airway propped open with gentle air pressure. Some people prefer oral appliances that push the jaw forward, and positional strategies, weight loss, or avoiding alcohol and sedatives before bed can help too. Central apnea often needs a different approach and input from a sleep specialist because it's tied to how the brain controls breathing. If this sounds familiar, your partner says you stop breathing during the night, you wake up gasping, or you feel chronically drained despite enough sleep, don't shrug it off as just snoring. Think of apnea as your brain's autopilot stuttering repeatedly through the night. It's measurable, it's fixable in many cases, and addressing it can be the difference between dragging through your days and actually waking up restored. If you suspect apnea, mention it to your doctor and ask about a sleep evaluation. Your heart, brain, and next morning's energy will thank you. Restless Legs Syndrome. Now let's talk about something a lot of people know too well but rarely name out loud: restless legs syndrome. Maybe you've been there, sitting on the couch after a long day, bone-deep tired, and suddenly your legs feel alive with pins and crawling that you can't ignore. It's not just an itch you can scratch. It's an urgent, almost electric need to move when, logically, your body should be still. It usually starts as a tingling or a crawling sensation deep inside the legs, a feeling that's hard to describe unless you've felt it. The worst part, it often shows up in the evening or at night when your brain is preparing to wind down. That mismatch is central to what's happening. The dopamine pathways that regulate movement, which normally help your body relax into stillness, begin to falter as the day ends. When those signals get noisy or weak, the brain interprets silence as stimulation. Brain scans of people with RLS actually light up sensory areas as if the legs were being touched or rubbed, even though nothing is happening externally. It's as if your nervous system is playing a trick on you. For someone with RLS, stillness feels unbearable until movement resets the signal. You walk around, bounce your feet, pace the room, anything that gives temporary relief. That movement isn't just habit, it literally interrupts the misfiring circuit. But that relief is often short-lived, and the exhaustion that pushed you to lie down in the first place stays. It creates this cruel paradox. Fatigue demands rest, while the body demands motion. RLS is the nervous system stuck between calm and chaos, unable to choose. There are things that make RLS more likely or worse. Iron deficiency can be a big factor. Iron is important in dopamine production, so low iron can worsen those pathway problems. Genetics play a role too. You might find your parent or grandparent had similar nighttime restlessness. Certain medications can trigger or exacerbate symptoms as well. That's why it's not just bad nerves or stress. There's real biology behind it, and it's reversible or manageable in many cases. If you've ever felt guilty admitting you can't sit still during a movie or felt like your legs have a mind of their own at bedtime, you're not alone, and it's not just in your head. The lived experience is frustrating. You're physically drained, but mentally kept awake by sensations your body insists you do something about. Small, practical moves, stretching, short walks, or rolling your feet can help temporarily. But if it's happening nightly or affecting your sleep, it's worth talking to a doctor about iron levels, medications you're taking, and possible treatments that target those dopamine pathways. Before we move on to how RLS is treated and what actually helps restore that balance, keep in mind this. RLS isn't laziness or bedtime drama. It's a neurological tug-of-war, and understanding that is the first step toward getting rest back. Night terrors. Night terrors are sudden, intense bursts of fear that happen deep in non-REM sleep. You might hear someone scream, sit bolt upright, or thrash in bed without ever fully waking. Later, most people have no memory of it. This is different from a nightmare. Nightmares happen during REM sleep and often have a story, characters, and plot. Night terrors are more like a raw surge of panic, emotion without a coherent dream or narrative. Brain scans during an episode light up the limbic system, especially the amygdala, like an alarm bell, while the parts that make up conscious thought stay offline. It's basically the ancient fight or flight circuitry misfiring while the higher brain is still snoozing. For many parents, the first time they hear their child scream in the night is terrifying because the child doesn't fully wake, can't explain what's wrong, and usually has no memory in the morning. They're most common in children between about 3 and 7 years old as sleep cycles and the balance between deep and REM sleep are still maturing. Kids often outgrow them, but that doesn't mean the episode isn't scary to witness, or that adults can't have them too. In adults, the triggers are often different. High stress, fever, sleep deprivation, medication changes, and a history of trauma can all tip the ancient alarm into an episode. If it happens to someone you love, it helps to know it's rarely dangerous, even though it feels violent. You can't reason with the limbic system the way you can with someone awake. Gentle intervention, like making sure the sleeper is safe, lowering bright lights, and speaking in calm, simple phrases, can be soothing even if it doesn't fully stop the episode. If episodes are frequent or an adult suddenly starts having them, a sleep specialist can run tests, check medications, and look for underlying causes like seizures or parasomnias. Knowing the difference between nightmare and night terror can make a huge emotional difference too. It changes what you can do in the moment and how you explain it later. Think of night terrors as an alarm system from an earlier era, loud, urgent, and mostly aimed at getting the body ready to act, not at telling a story. That image helps me when I've sat up beside a child at 2 a.m., heart hammering, feeling helpless. Knowing the brain is rehearsing survival makes it easier to stay calm and offer steady comfort. If you're the one who experiences night terrors, tracking stress, sleep habits, fever episodes, and emotional triggers can reveal patterns and help your doctor tailor treatment. The good news is that, for most people, night terrors are an episodic glitch. Alarming in the moment, but manageable with patience, safety measures, and, when needed, professional support. Coming up, we'll explore practical ways to reduce triggers, improve sleep hygiene, and support both children and adults who face night terrors so you can feel more prepared, less alone, and more confident about helping someone through the night. We'll also hear personal stories and expert tips, right? Hypnagogic hallucinations. Slide a little deeper into that narrow in-between and you'll find one of the strangest little tricks our brains play. Hypnagogic hallucinations. It's that moment when you're not quite asleep and not quite awake and the world around you starts to bend. You might suddenly hear your name whispered across the room, glimpse movement in the corner of your eye, or feel as if someone is standing just behind you, real enough to make your heart skip, but gone the next breath. Think of it as the dream machinery booting up early. The parts of the brain that create imagery and sound, the visual and auditory cortices, begin firing before your eyes and ears have completely stopped processing the outside world. That overlap is where the confusion happens. Internal imagination and external perception get mixed together, and the product can feel indistinguishable from reality for a few seconds. I get why people find this unnerving. Picture lying in bed after a long day, all your muscles heavy, your thoughts drifting. You hear a soft murmur, maybe your name, maybe a snippet of a song, and for a moment you sit bolt upright, convinced someone called you. Or you might see a shadow glide across the ceiling, enough to make you check the doorway. Then you blink, and it's gone. There's no one, no noise, just you, wondering if you imagined the whole thing. These hallucinations are often paired with sleep paralysis or extreme fatigue. When your body is exhausted, the boundary between sleep stages gets blurrier. You can be mentally aware while parts of your nervous system have already entered REM-like states. That mismatch is what creates the sensation of a presence or vivid sensory flashes while you're still anchored to your bed. And because the experience happens so close to waking, the emotional reaction, fear, curiosity, bewilderment, can feel intensified. Here's the important thing. Hypnagogic hallucinations are common and usually harmless. They're not a sign of psychosis or a broken brain. Instead, they're an honest and revealing peek at how consciousness transitions. You can literally watch your awareness flicker, overlap, and dissolve as the sleeping mind and the waking mind trade places. In that liminal space, perception is painted with both real input and dream materials. The result is something that borrows components from both, creating illusions that feel palpably true. If you've experienced this, you're not alone. And you're not imagining something supernatural. A useful way to cope is to ground yourself when it happens. Focus on steady breathing, gently move your fingers or toes, remind yourself that your body is safe. Most episodes pass quickly and leave behind only the odd memory of how strange the brain can be. Next, we'll look at how this slipping between worlds can blend into full sleep paralysis and what that feels like when the body refuses to follow the mind. But for now, remember, those fleeting visions are just the brain's transition mechanics, doing their messy, fascinating work. Hypnopompic hallucinations. On the other side of falling asleep is waking up, and for some of us, waking brings its own little ghost show. Hypnopompic hallucinations are basically the mirror image of hypnagogic ones. They arrive as consciousness is coming back online when the dream world hasn't quite let go. You might open your eyes and for a second see a face at the foot of the bed, catch a shadow moving across the doorway, or hear your name called from another room. Then, just as quickly, it's gone. Like some film frame that didn't quite render, it helps to picture what's happening inside your head. During REM sleep, the brain is creating vivid sensory experiences without outside input. When you wake, the sensory systems, vision, hearing, touch, reboot at different speeds. If those internal dream sensations haven't shut down before eyes, ears, or muscles come back, they overlap. The result is exactly what it sounds like, a sliver of dream stuck to the edge of waking. For a heartbeat, the line between real and imagined becomes transparent, and you're standing on both sides. That moment can feel beautiful, strange, or downright terrifying. I can still remember a time I woke convinced someone whispered a warning in the dark. My heart racing for a few seconds before the voice dissolved and the quiet of my apartment returned. Maybe you've experienced a similar jolt, a voice that vanishes, a pattern of light that morphs into a curtain, or the brief, uncanny impression that someone else is in the room. Combine that with the immobility of sleep paralysis, and it can feel like the brain is actively trying to deceive you, breathing life into a threat that isn't there. Here's the important part. This is not a sign you're losing your mind. It's a normal, if unsettling, consequence of the brain taking a few extra breaths to fully wake up. The waking mind sometimes catches the last frame of the dream before the projector shuts off. That catch, that lingering image or sound, explains why the feeling is so convincing. Your brain is literally reusing the same sensory machinery that makes dreams feel real. If you want to make these episodes less frequent, some simple things help. Regular sleep, cutting late caffeine, and managing stress reduce REM pressure and the chance of REM content spilling into wakefulness. When it happens, grounding techniques help. Focus on breathing, look for small, stable details in the room, wiggle your fingers or toes to bring the body back into play. If hypnopompic experiences are frequent, severe, or leave you anxious during the day, it's worth talking to a clinician. They can check for sleep disorders like narcolepsy or REM sleep intrusion. These moments are weird, sometimes eerie, but they're also a reminder of how fluid the boundary between dreaming and waking really is. A short-lived overlap where the mind borrows from both worlds. REM behavior disorder. One of the most startling ways sleep can betray us is REM behavior disorder. Normally, when you sink into REM sleep, the stage of vivid, story-like dreaming, your body hits a safety switch. Your major muscles are effectively paralyzed, so your dreams stay in your head. In RBD, that switch fails. The dream keeps playing, but now the body is an actor. Picture this. Someone dreaming they're being chased, and their legs start to pedal, or they swing a fist at an imagined threat. You might hear shouting, swearing, even violent movements, punches, flailing arms, sudden kicks. Partners tell stories of being woken by a hand in their face. Caregivers describe nights when an older parent stands up and starts to walk while still asleep. It's not just unsettling. It can be dangerous. People have fallen out of bed, injured themselves, or hurt the person sharing the bed. What's happening under the hood is fascinating. During an RBD episode, polysomnography, the sleep lab test, shows a paradox. The brain's electrical activity looks like classic REM, fast waves, rapid eye movements, and the signature of vivid immersion in a dream. While electromyography, EMG recordings, show spikes of muscle activity that should not be there. In other words, your mind is deep in a dream, and your body is suddenly allowed to perform it. This disorder tends to show up in older adults. It can be idiopathic, simply appearing without a clear cause, but it's also one of the earliest red flags neurologists watch for. Long before tremors or stiffness, RBD can signal changes in the brainstem machinery that regulates REM and movement. And in some people, it precedes synuclein-related conditions, including Parkinson's disease, by years. That's why neurologists take it seriously. It's a window into how the networks that separate dreaming from doing can break down. For viewers who've experienced or witnessed it, the emotional mix is complicated. There's humor in a partner shouting in their sleep, but there's also fear. What if a dream becomes dangerous? What does it mean for our future brain health? The disorder is oddly intimate too. It exposes the way our private inner life can spill into the shared physical world. Because RBD literally bridges dream and action, it's been a rich subject for research. Studying it helps scientists map the circuits that enforce atonia, that REM paralysis, and understand how those circuits interact with motor systems. In a clinical sense, it gives doctors a chance to intervene early, to protect patients from injury, and to monitor for neurological changes that might follow. If you or someone you sleep with starts acting out dreams, especially later in life, it's worth mentioning to a doctor. A sleep study can confirm what's happening, and there are management strategies to reduce risk and improve safety. More than anything, recognizing RBD reminds us how delicate the lines are between mind and body, and how much our nightly theatre depends on a tiny, crucial switch that usually keeps the show backstage. Exploding dreams. Sometimes a dream doesn't just fade, it detonates. One moment you're someplace vivid and impossible. The next, there's a bang or a flash that jerks you awake so instantly you can still feel the last frame of the dream in your mouth. If you've ever been startled that way and reached blindly for your phone to check for an alarm that never rang, you've probably met what people call an exploding dream. These episodes overlap with something neurologists call exploding head syndrome, but they're not the same thing. The key difference is timing. Exploding dreams happen fully inside REM sleep during the most vivid dreaming state. The noise you hear isn't out in the room. It's the dream itself ending so abruptly that your brain and consciousness collide. Imagine the story of a movie being ripped off screen and dumped straight into the light. That jolt is the sound. Neurologically, what's going on sounds dramatic because it feels dramatic. As the brain shifts states, from a deep, immersive REM pattern toward waking, networks that were firing in a complex, desynchronized pattern can suddenly snap into a moment of synchronized firing. It's a brief electrical chorus, and subjectively, it registers like a pop, crack, or blinding flash. People often describe it as if their mind tripped a breaker. Everything goes black or silent, then there's this forced, instantaneous reassembly of awareness. Those moments tend to follow a familiar set of triggers: stress, fragmented sleep, or waking up at an odd time. If you've been tossing and turning, pulling late nights, or carrying a heavy worry, the sleep architecture becomes patchy and REM can be interrupted more abruptly, setting the stage for an exploding dream. That's why these episodes often show up around periods of high pressure or after a few nights of bad sleep. Here's the important part: they're startling but harmless. There's no physical damage, no signal your brain is failing. What's left is curiosity, and sometimes a little linger of adrenaline that keeps you awake for a few minutes. For many people, the fastest way to calm down afterward is the basics: slow, steady breathing, grounding yourself by naming 5 things in the room, and reminding yourself it was an internal event. Longer term, improving sleep consistency, winding down before bed, and managing stress reduces how often they happen. If you've experienced one, you're not alone, and you didn't imagine it. It's just one of those strange, intense moments where the mind's dreaming energy gets expelled all at once, louder than any alarm, then fades. Next, we'll look at another kind of dream interruption and what it can tell us about how sleep repairs and sometimes betrays our daytime selves. Sleep talking. You know that moment when someone beside you mumbles a slice of a sentence in the dark and you freeze, half asleep, trying to decide if you should laugh, record it, or worry. That's sleep talking, somniloquy. And it's surprisingly common and totally human. It happens when the brain's language centers flicker to life during light sleep or during transitions between stages. In plain terms, Broca's area, the part of your brain that tells your mouth how to form words, wakes up a little while the rest of you is still dreaming. The result is speech that's often fragmented, dreamlike, and sometimes downright nonsense. Most of us will experience it at some point, whether we're the one whispering in our sleep or the roommate who wakes up to an unexpected monologue. The person speaking is genuinely unaware. They aren't acting out a secret plan or confessing deep truths. What comes out are bits of thought and dream dialogue, impressions stitched together by the sleeping mind. Stressful days or emotionally intense dreams make sleep talking more likely. Which is why after a big breakup, exam week, or a tense workday, you might suddenly become the star of your partner's late-night audio collection. Recordings of sleep talk are a window into how varied it can be. Sometimes it's a barely audible whisper that dissolves into silence. Other times it's a full sentence or even what sounds like a short conversation. I remember once recording my partner saying completely deadpan, "Did you unplug the marshmallows?" and us replaying it until we were in tears. Moments like that are funny, strange, and, important to remember, harmless in almost every case. There's a bit of drama in the idea that sleep talk might spill secrets, but it's rare. The content is usually not a direct confession or a deliberate revelation. Think of it more like the brain doing a late-night edit. Snippets of conversations, worries, images from the day, and fragments of dream logic get remixed into speech. The mouth speaks as the mind edits its thoughts for morning. What comes out are echoes, not polished truths. If you're the one who sleep talks and you're worried, try tracking stress, caffeine, and sleep patterns. Most of the time, it's nothing to treat. If it's loud enough to disturb your household, or it's paired with other disruptive night behaviors, it's worth mentioning to a doctor. Otherwise, enjoy the oddity. Sleep talking is one of those small reminders that our brains keep working long after our eyes close. Sometimes lending us a ghost of a conversation we'll only understand after the coffee in the morning. Narcolepsy. Picture this. You're mid-conversation, laughing at a joke, and suddenly the world goes soft. Your thoughts feel like they're sliding into a dream, your eyelids flutter, and before you know it, you're briefly asleep. Except you're still sitting there, coffee in hand, the sentence you were saying hanging in the air. That abrupt, baffling shift between wakefulness and REM sleep is the hallmark of narcolepsy. Narcolepsy doesn't mean always tired. It's not laziness or plain exhaustion. It's a failure of the brain's traffic lights that normally sort awake from dreaming. The key culprit is the loss of neurons that make a neurotransmitter called hypocretin, also known as orexin. Hypocretin acts like a stabilizer for our alertness. It helps keep wakefulness steady and keeps REM sleep where it belongs. When those neurons are gone, the brain mismanages transitions and lets REM sleep features leak into the waking world. That leak can be strange and unsettling. People with narcolepsy can experience hypnagogic hallucinations, vivid dream fragments appearing while they're awake, or sudden, irresistible sleep episodes that last seconds to minutes. Imagine nodding off mid-sentence in a meeting, or having a daydream turn real enough that you pinch yourself, unsure whether you actually fell asleep. One of the most dramatic symptoms is cataplexy, sudden muscle weakness triggered by strong emotions, especially laughter, surprise, or anger. Picture telling a funny story and feeling the muscles around your face go slack or your knees buckle when you hear great news. Cataplexy is essentially REM atonia, the paralysis that normally keeps us from acting out our dreams, intruding while consciousness remains. That overlap can be frightening for the person experiencing it and confusing for everyone around them who doesn't understand what's happening. Because narcolepsy blurs those boundaries, a person can feel awake and dreaming at the same time. That produces a surreal inner world. You're aware, you can respond, but parts of your brain are running REM programs. It's one of the clearest windows into how delicately the brain balances two opposite realities. When that balance tips, it shows just how easily we can slip from one to the other. On a day-to-day level, narcolepsy impacts work, school, relationships, and safety. Falling asleep while driving or operating machinery is dangerous. Nodding off in class can derail learning. Cataplexy can make social situations unpredictable. But with understanding, accommodations, and treatment, many people manage symptoms and lead full lives. Treatments aim to stabilize wakefulness and reduce REM intrusion through medications and behavioral strategies like scheduled naps, sleep hygiene, and avoiding sudden changes in routine. If you or someone you know experiences sudden daytime sleep attacks, vivid dreamlike experiences while awake, or emotion-triggered loss of muscle tone, don't assume it's just tiredness. It's a sign that the brain's sleep-wake switch needs attention. Narcolepsy gives us a rare, humbling glimpse into how the mind constructs reality every second, and how a tiny population of cells, by their presence or absence, can make that construction wobble. Circadian rhythm disorder. Think about the last time you landed after a long flight and couldn't sleep, even though you were exhausted, or the morning after a night shift when your brain felt like it belonged to someone in a different time zone. That's not just being tired. That's your circadian rhythm getting lost. Your circadian rhythm is the body's built-in 24-hour clock. It times everything from when you feel sleepy to when your stomach wants breakfast and when certain hormones should spike. At the center of that clock is a tiny region in the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN. You can picture the SCN as an orchestra conductor. It listens to signals from the environment, light, darkness, temperature, and tells the rest of the body when to play and when to rest. When those signals are clear, the orchestra performs smoothly. When they're mixed up, the music goes off beat. Modern life throws a lot of confusing cues at that conductor. Shift work flips your sleep window, jet lag drags you across time zones, late-night screens pump blue light into your eyes, and irregular meals or unpredictable social plans nudge the timing of your hormones. The SCN starts misreading those cues and sends sleep signals at the wrong moments. So you might lie awake when it's night and get a second wind, or you might slump at your desk in the middle of the day because your body thinks it's time to sleep. That mismatch is the core of circadian rhythm disorder. The problem isn't that your body doesn't need sleep, it still does, but that the timing is wrong. Sleep happens, just at off hours. That's why a nurse working nights can sleep during the day but still feel permanently foggy. The body is rested in quantity but out of sync with environmental demands. Those timing errors don't just make you groggy. Over weeks and months, misalignment starts to ripple through mood, digestion, and immune function. People with chronic circadian disruption report higher rates of anxiety and depression, more digestive complaints like reflux or irregular bowel habits, and a greater tendency to catch colds. Hormones that control appetite, blood sugar, and inflammation are all tied to the clock, so when it's out of sync, metabolism and immune defense wobble too. And it's easy to relate. Maybe you've pulled an all-nighter and reached for sugar in the morning, only to regret it later when your energy crashes. Or you've tried to sleep on a vacation day, but your brain insists it's time to be awake. Those little episodes are the same mechanism at work. The glitch is timing, not desire. Your brain still wants rest, just at the wrong hour. Understanding this makes the problem less mysterious and more solvable. Modern life may constantly challenge an ancient rhythm built for sunrise and darkness, but there are ways to give that conductor clearer cues. Next, we'll look at practical strategies that help realign your clock so your nights feel like nights and your days stop feeling like a battle. Sleep deprivation. Hallucinations. Think about the last time you stayed up way later than you meant to. Not just a late movie, but a night that slid into morning. At first, you're just tired, a little slow, maybe clumsy. Then things start to feel a little off. A shadow flickers at the edge of your vision, and you swear somebody moved in the corner of the room, or you hear your name whispered when nobody's there. Those moments aren't just imagination or a trick of bad lighting. They're your brain trying to dream while you're still awake. After long stretches without sleep, the brain doesn't simply shut down. It starts to steal from REM, the phase where we dream. REM sleep is not an optional luxury for the brain. It's a fundamental way it processes emotions, memories, and associations. When REM is denied, parts of that dreaming machinery begin popping up into wakefulness. You get visual distortions, phantom voices, fleeting shadows, dreamlike pieces pasted onto your real world. They can be tiny at first, a flash of color, a misread movement, but sometimes they coalesce into a convincing scene. A person standing in your doorway who isn't there, or a voice that sounds exactly like someone you know calling you from the hallway. There's a reason these experiences feel so convincing. The prefrontal cortex, the brain's reality-checking center, is one of the first regions to show signs of wear from sleep loss. Normally, it keeps perception and imagination neatly separated. Sleep-deprived, it loses grip. Think of the prefrontal cortex like the editor of a story. Without rest, the editor falls asleep at the desk, and the wild creative team runs with the plot. Memories, fears, and random associations flood in, and the line between what you're seeing and what you're remembering blurs. That's why the hallucinations have a dream quality. They're not hallucinations in the psychiatric sense of a psychotic break. They are REM-like intrusions. The brain inserting dream content into waking life because it's desperate for that processing time. The mind refuses to stay conscious forever. If you keep pushing it, it quietly builds an escape hatch, dreams that leak into your daytime. This doesn't just affect perception. Prolonged sleep deprivation gnaws at nearly every system you care about. Memory becomes patchy. You may find it hard to hold a sentence in mind or recall a name. Mood swings sharpen into irritability or tearfulness. Your metabolism shifts, hunger and insulin responses change, and your immune system weakens, so a cold you'd shrug off when rested turns into something that lingers. But the hallucinatory experiences stand out because they're visceral and uncanny. They're the brain's loud, unmistakable signal that something essential is missing. If you've ever stood in a quiet kitchen and convinced yourself for a second that the mug on the counter was a small animal, or heard a brief whisper that disappeared when you turned around, you've felt this boundary dissolve. It's unnerving because it's intimate. It shows how close perception and imagination really are. If those episodes start happening frequently, it's not a quirky brain trick to ignore. It's your brain begging for a proper night of sleep. Take it seriously. Rest, reset, and if the experiences persist or feel frightening, talk to a clinician. Your mind is telling you the same thing your body is. It needs to sleep. Lucid dreaming. One night you're falling, then you suddenly think, wait, I'm dreaming. The scene doesn't vanish. Instead, something subtle shifts. You can step back and watch the dream like a movie, or you can decide to fly, shout at a stranger, or simply follow a corridor to see what happens next. That moment, awareness inside the dream, is what scientists call lucid dreaming. Neurologically, lucid dreaming happens when part of the brain that's usually quiet during REM sleep, the prefrontal cortex, flickers back on. The prefrontal cortex is the seat of self-reflection and planning. When it partially reactivates during REM, it brings a thread of self-awareness into a world that otherwise runs on automatic. The dream continues, colors, emotions, narrative. But now you have a voice in it. You don't wake up. Instead, your brain catches itself in the act of imagining and seems to say, "I see you." People experience lucid dreams in different ways. Some become directors. They rewrite plots, summon people, or practice skills. Athletes sometimes use lucid dreams to rehearse movements. Others are content to be an attentive observer, fascinated that they can examine a dream from the inside, cataloging smells, textures, or how unjustified fears look when you're lucid. Both ways are valid. The common thread is that rare recognition of being the author and the audience at the same time. Scientists don't have to take dreamers' word for it. They can measure lucidity. In classic experiments, trained lucid dreamers agree with researchers on an eye movement signal, like looking left-right, a pattern that can be detected on an EEG or polysomnography during REM sleep. When the eye signal appears and the brain data confirms REM activity, researchers know the subject is still asleep but self-aware. For a short window, consciousness is effectively pointing to itself from inside the dream. It's a unique experimental situation, the mind studying its own phenomena in real time without the veil of waking interpretation. That uniqueness is why lucid dreaming nudges at the edges of how we define awareness. Normally, we think awareness equals wakefulness. Lucidity shows us otherwise. Awareness can arise while the brain still produces the hallucinatory logic of dreams. It raises questions about where the self sits. Is it a neural circuit, a narrative, an observer? And more practically, it suggests the brain has a capacity for metacognition during sleep, recognizing its own constructions that we don't yet fully understand. If you've ever had a fleeting aha in a dream, the uncanny moment you knew you were inside a story, that's not a malfunction. It's a tiny, remarkable recalibration of consciousness. The brain isn't breaking down, it's briefly turning the flashlight inward and saying, "I see you imagining." In the next part, we'll look at how people try to increase lucid dreams intentionally and what risks and rewards come with training your sleeping mind to wake up while it's still dreaming. Microsleep. That leads us to something even sneakier, microsleep. You know the feeling. You're halfway through a late-night study session or cruising down the highway on a long, quiet stretch, and for a second, everything goes fuzzy. That second can be the brain slipping into a tiny bout of sleep without your permission. Microsleeps are involuntary bursts of sleep that last only a few seconds, often while your eyes are open and, to you, nothing obvious seems to be happening. But under the surface, your brainwaves look exactly like they do in full sleep. Picture it this way. The body's begging for rest, the lights stay on, but the brain quietly powers down to grab what it needs. It's like your brain seizing emergency rest, even against your will. You can resist a snack, hold a conversation, push through boredom, but you can't hold off sleep forever. When the need for sleep outweighs your survival instincts, the brain simply takes control. Sudden nods, micro blanks of attention, or a flash of dream imagery can arrive in the middle of a task, and for those seconds, your reaction time drops to zero. This is why microsleep is so dangerous in real-world situations. Think about driving. 1 second of your brain checking out is 1 second your foot won't hit the brake. Or imagine the person hunched over notes at 3 a.m., thinking they're still kind of awake, only to snap back a moment later with no memory of a few seconds or more. Monotonous tasks, long meetings, night shifts, repetitive assembly work are breeding grounds for these tiny shutdowns. The eyes can stay open, but the mind has already left the building. You've probably experienced the signs without labeling them. Your eyes struggle to stay focused. Your mind wanders. You miss the last few seconds of a conversation, or your head jerks up like you've been caught dozing. If that's familiar, consider it your body's emergency alarm. Treat it seriously. So what do you do in the moment? If you're behind the wheel, the rule is simple and non-negotiable. Pull over safely and rest. If you can't stop immediately, open the window, switch the music up, or ask a passenger to take over. But those are only band-aids. Short-term fixes like a quick 15 to 20-minute nap or a cup of coffee followed by a brief nap, the so-called coffee nap, can help restore alertness for a while. Fresh air, movement, and bright light will jolt your state temporarily, but they're no substitute for proper sleep. Long-term prevention matters most. Regular sleep, planned naps when needed, limiting long, boring stretches of solo work, and avoiding driving or high-risk tasks when you're sleep-deprived. Shift workers and night drivers should be especially cautious. Microsleeps don't ask your permission before they happen. Microsleep is a blunt reminder that sleep isn't optional. Each blink can be a blackout. Each second can be a tiny dream. Treat those moments as warnings, not nuisances, and give your brain the rest it's been asking for. Delayed sleep phase syndrome. Think about the late-night friend who's at their best when the rest of the world is winding down. The person who feels awake and creative at 2 a.m. but can barely drag themselves out of bed for an 8 a.m. meeting. For some people, that's not just a habit or a preference. It's delayed sleep phase syndrome, a biological shift in the body clock that makes normal bedtime feel like an impossible target. Here's what's happening. Your internal clock, the circadian rhythm that times sleep and wake, is running late. The brain's signal to produce melatonin, the sleep-promoting hormone, comes hours after it does in most people. So instead of starting to feel sleepy at 10 or 11 p.m., melatonin onset might not happen until 2, 3, or even 4 a.m. The result isn't that you can't sleep at all. It's that you can't fall asleep at the time society expects you to. If you could choose your schedule, you'd sleep fine and wake feeling refreshed. But most jobs, schools, and social obligations don't bend to your biology. It's important to be clear. This is not insomnia in the usual sense. Insomnia means trouble falling or staying asleep, even when you're trying. With delayed sleep phase syndrome, people can sleep soundly once they fall asleep. Their problem is falling asleep at the conventional time. That distinction matters because it changes how we explain the problem to others and how we approach treatment. DSPS often shows up in adolescence. Teenagers commonly shift later, and for some that shift doesn't correct itself with adulthood. Genetics play a big role. If your parents were night owls, there's a higher chance you might be too. Modern life makes it worse. Blue light from phones and laptops suppresses melatonin and pushes the clock later, and late-night social media or gaming can reinforce staying up. Add caffeine or irregular sleep patterns, and the phase delay can become cemented. Living with a delayed clock feels like living slightly out of phase with the world. You can be sharp, funny, and productive during your waking hours, but you're chronically behind on mornings, late for classes or meetings, and exhausted when forced into early schedules. Social invitations before noon are awkward. Morning gym classes are a non-starter. There's also a psychological weight, feeling judged as lazy when in reality your biology is misaligned with external timetables. People with DSPS often find small, practical shifts make a big difference. Consistent sleep-wake times, morning light exposure to nudge the circadian clock earlier, and avoiding screens before bed. In some cases, carefully timed melatonin or light therapy under medical guidance can help reset the clock. But these interventions take patience. The body's rhythm doesn't change overnight. If this sounds familiar, if nights feel like home and mornings feel foreign, you're not alone, and it's not just bad habits. Understanding that this is a circadian mismatch, not a character flaw, can be the first step toward finding routines, workarounds, or professional help that let you live more comfortably in a world that mostly runs on someone else's schedule.